Hello, it's Dr. Tirrell, and this brief tutorial will be over our business card. So we're going to be compiling some different things that we've learned and bringing together text and graphics and that sort of thing. So let's go ahead and take a look at what our goals are for this. One is get some experience integrating images, including a QR code, right? That is a component of this project, and text. We want to have those things together for our business card. And we also want experience designing for a confined space. I mean, that's one of the challenges of a business card is it's generally a standard size. I am requiring you to do a standard 3.5 by 2 inch. You can, obviously deviate from that outside of the classroom, but I just want to make sure that we're all up to scratch with these kinds of parameters. And it's always a unique design challenge. Well, not unique, but it's always a design challenge to design for particular spaces, right? That's always a factor, the sort of physical context, the methods of deployment. Here, it's sort of a significant challenge of this format in that it's very confined. So we'll be doing that. In terms of tools we're going to be using, I'm going to be using Illustrator and Inkscape. Ordinarily, you just use one or the other. I mean, you could use them in tandem, but they do pretty much the same job. They're vector design tools. There's lots of tools you could potentially use to make one of these, right? Photoshop would be an example, although it's generally it's mostly a pixel editor, a raster editor. So since we've been designing logos in vectors in order to make them scalable, we'd have to convert it to a pixel format, which you can, of course, do, but then you lose the flexibility, the scalability. That would be an option. A typesetter like InDesign or Scribus would be an option. That might be a little bit of overkill for this. You can certainly do that for single-page documents. Generally, typesetters are for multi-page documents, but you could certainly accomplish this task with a typesetter. Even simple things like word processors can be an option, although they're kind of rudimentary for this task. So you end up generally with a quality that's not the same as if you use something like, in our case, a vector design tool. So that's just a heads up. You can use whatever you want, really. I don't mandate what tool you have to use. But for a single page kind of task like this, a single screen, generally something like a vector design tool, particularly if you're working with vector images already, that's going to be great. Illustrator will be great. And those tools can support importing pixel images. So, I mean, you can always bring in pixel stuff. It's just that they are predicated around vector design. All right, that's enough of that. I want to make these tutorials briefer because they go on forever. So let's start. First, let's back out of the old presentation here. So I've got Illustrator already open. So let me just drag over our project page here, just so we all know what the expectations are. We've got business card containing the associated logo, contact information, and an active QR code, 3.5 inches by 2 inches, right? So those are our basic parameters. We know we need the logo. We know we need contact info of some sort, although that is intentionally vague, so that you can kind of put as much or as little as you'd like. Oh, and of course, for this project, you can put fictitious contact information if you're not super comfortable with giving out your actual private information. In fact, I recommend you use fictitious information just because I don't want that responsibility either. And then an active QR code. We haven't really looked at that. We're going to in class, but this will give you a heads up. We talked about them. We kind of know what they are. They are those, two-dimensional squares of sort of black and white cubes. And this is what they look like. They allow digital technology to do particular things. So they're most used with things like smartphones. You'll see these, as you can see, the Nintendo 3DS uses them. A lot of times you can find them in advertising. So, you'll see them at places or sometimes on tags, and you can scan them with your smartphone and get a discount or something. So that's the way to think of them is kind of like barcodes. In fact, technically they are barcodes. They just can contain a load more data, and they can do just a lot more things. So you could point your smartphone at one of these, and it could take you to a website, or it could send a text, or it could make a call with your permission, of course. But it can just do a whole lot of things. And one of the strengths is that, they don't require any high-tech stuff. It's really just an image. It can be, as you can see in some of these examples, just print it out and paste it onto something. You can make them out of paint. I've seen some examples of creative ones that have been made out of things like hedges. They just grew hedges in the shape, and your smartphone can scan them, and they work fine. So they're really flexible, really cheap, really go anywhere technology. And for that reason, they have this niche. They haven't blown up in America the way that they have in other countries, but they're not going anywhere because you just can't beat, the intersection of nearly free and high productivity. They do a lot of stuff very, very cheaply compared to competing things like NFC, near field communication. That, even though it's cheap, or RFID, those require little chips. So, they're beyond the ability of you or I to actually make, really. We can make as many QR codes right now as we want. So that's that. That's partially why I'm asking you to do this. It's also just part of the design challenge. So let's turn to our tool here. We've got Adobe Illustrator in their new dark theme. Just going to open up a new document here. And you can see, because I've been doing this in prep, the width is set for 3.5 by 2. You can do that. If you do, you want to make sure you set the margins to zip, the bleed to 0. Otherwise, that by default they're like 1/2 inch, and you'd have this very, very tiny window in which to design. So you could set it to 3.5 by 2, and then just kill the margins, and you can design to the edge. That's what we call it when there's no margin. Or you could, if you wanted to. I have no problem if you just use, a piece of letter paper and then just insert a 3.5 by 2 square. That's perfectly fine. Sometimes people will do that just so that they can really get a look at how this appears. I'm not going to do it right now, and there are some other reasons why you might want to use a larger paper, but we'll talk about those here in a bit. Let's just a larger artboard. Sorry. Let's just stick to the basics, and then we'll go from there. So I am going to make this 3.5 by 2. It's going to the edge. Color mode was correct, although I could always change that, right? Because this would be a CMYK or even a grayscale color mode rather than an RGB, which is for works intended for the screen. You can always change back and forth, but they don't look the same. Information gets altered. I mean, they don't represent color the same way, so they just don't look identically. It's not a flaw. That's just, they're different ways of representing color, so they don't look the same. If you're interested in this, there are classes on color theory that would be fascinating. Anywho, so I am going to just pull in our logo. I don't want to go through making that again. You can watch the other tutorial for that. So I'm going to go to, let's see, where's place? There it is. Sorry, I did that too quickly. It's file place. That sounds unusual because you'd think it'd be like import or insert or something like that, but you're placing an item on the artboard here. So I had it saved as a PDF. Blammo. Almost the right size. We can, of course, scale this, and we can also interact with these as individual objects, but I don't really need to. Just zoom out here. Let's see, do I want to scale this? Yeah, I do, because let's just sort of see how that works. And of course, when I do this, it free transforms, so it could squish and that kind of thing. I don't want to do that. I'm going to hold down Shift so that it locks it in the correct aspect ratio. And because these are vectors, I can scale them as much as I'd like. Doesn't matter. It's all math. So let's just go with that. So there's our logo up here. The other thing would be our QR code. So we'll pull that in, and then we want some contact info. So for our QR code, oh shoot, I probably closed that. Let me just pull up another page. Here's our home page. Under assignments and personal brand, under resources here, there's a link to a QR code generator, right? It's right here under this information about QR code uses, right? So if we go to the QR code generator, and there are actually a ton of these online. This is just one I linked to because I've used it before. Let me explain to you sort of the gist of how QR codes work. So all they are is these images. And what happens is someone who has a QR code reader, generally those are smartphone apps. They also have them for desktops. But if you think about how these are used, it's a little unusual, right? They tend to be used for something that's mobile and out and about in the world. You see one, as you can see here on a business card, you scan it. You see one on a tag at a store and you scan it. You see one on a building and you scan it. It gives you more information about the building. You see how that would be weird with a desktop computer or even a laptop computer? You wouldn't point your laptop's, camera up to a wall. But you can see why these things go hand in hand with smartphones and tablets. That's also one of the reasons why they didn't blow up quite in this country. Believe it or not, our country is way, way behind in things like cell phone technology. There are reasons why we can talk about in class. A lot of it has to do with physical size. It's a giant country. Also, some borderline monopolistic practices by telcos. There's no real incentive for them to develop stuff if they already have essentially a legal monopoly. I don't want to get off on that tangent. But it is relevant to our stuff because, we're talking about open source and commercial software. So there are these things, right? There are these images. And as you can see over here with this handy dandy type selector, what happens when you scan these with your smartphone is variable. So you could have people automatically or on prompt, tend not to be automatic because that could be used maliciously. Go to a URL, for example, right? Or to display some text, or to trade a V card, which is an electronic business card, basically. That's actually something, since we're designing business cards, if you fill out this information, blah, 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 you can see it auto-generates there on the right. You don't have to put all that stuff. You can see it actually builds it in. And then when someone scans your business card, it transmits an electronic V card. So they get the data, right? That's actually a pretty useful thing to use since we're designing a business card. If you want to do that, that's perfectly fine. The only caveat is, it's not really a caveat, but not everyone uses V cards, right? I mean, how many electronic business cards do you have? If you're in an industry where people have these kinds of electronic Rolodex type things, then it can be an advantage. And V cards are, they're a format. It's not like it's a single program. So a lot of things can read them. Let's look at some other options. SMS, you can send a text, you can make a call, you can geolocate. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff you can do. Send an email, Wi-Fi. That tends to be things like sharing Wi-Fi passwords. So you put that up in your coffee shop, a person can scan it, and it tells them the password. You can use whatever you'd like. I'm going to use a URL. So for example, someone would scan my business card and it would take them to a profile, right? My online profile, which does actually exist. Right, so that's it. And you can see the auto generation going on over here. That is the QR code for this URL. It's basically ready to go. So all I need to do is click download here rather than embed. Embed puts it on the web, of course. And you can see some options here. Do we want a border? I don't. I just want the straight up code, but I could add a border if I wanted. You can see what happens when I change it. It actually scales a little bit. So a border of 0 there. I'm going to leave error correction on. We can set the foreground and background colors. That is a feature of QR codes. They really just need the pattern. As long as it can be read, interpreted, that's fine. That's all the machine needs. It doesn't need a particular color. The only thing you'd want to be aware of here is making sure that there's good contrast between your foreground and background, because I actually have had students in this project, their foreground and background contrast just wasn't high enough, and the scanners couldn't read it. It underscores why design is important. Black and white is obviously going to be the highest contrast one, but let's go back here. What if I wanted my color to actually tie into my existing scheme? Like the text I'm using here, this is not actually black, it's slate. You can see over here. And then I've got these different colors. Let me zoom in. All right. I've got these different colors for the different parts of my logo. Jeremy. So you can see these are different colors here. So I might want to incorporate sort of the color scheme, right? Like this font is actually slate rather than black. These elements are different colors as well. So let's just select maybe this one, just for whatever. I'm going to go ahead and click the color over here because it gives me the hex code. This thing under here is 6A6659. That's a code that can be understood by the QR code generator. It's a color code. It signifies that specific color. So let's leave our background as white, but change our foreground to that. Okay, and you can see it's actually changed over there. We can blow up our size, although since this is going to be a vector, it's not going to matter that much. We can download as either SVG or EPS. Both of those are vector formats. Let's go ahead and download as SVG. And we'll place that. There it is. Oh, let's back up just a hair. See, it's already grouped as an object, it looks like. Yeah. You can see the guide, see how it's giving me their center points. That's what that green light is. Let's scale that to match. There we go. Okay, and you can see how the color ties in with this one, right? That's when I selected, I think. Was it? Well, whatever. So you can see how you can change the colors of these, and it'll scan fine. It'll work fine. It really just needs the contrast. So we've got our QR code that connects to my portfolio. Again, you can use hypothetical data. You could have it connect to just text. You could have it connect to text message or a V card. Whatever you want to do is fine. It just needs to be an active QR code. All right, that's that. Text, we need contact information, right? So let's see, it's Jeremy, Tirrell. Where's this Myriad Pro? That's a good one. It's bold, condensed so that it goes more with that. And let's see, I could use the slate that I'm using here, right? Yeah. Oops. What happened if I path find this? Yeah, there we go. Now they're equally distributed. Bloop. Okay. Oops. I just ruined it. There we go. Excuse me. Oh, that's fine. So we'll, whatever, Tirrell J at, what is this, allbase.com. And let's scale that down and let's just make that regular. Same font family, so they fit together. But you can see they look different. And you know what? Let me tweak that color as well. That's probably too light. Let's see how that looks. Probably too light, huh? Maybe the gray, maybe this brownish red. Yeah, sure. All right, so that's the gist of how this works, right? Zoom out. We've got our logo, we've got our QR code that is active, we've got text and contact info. So those are the basic elements of our, just back up to this, the basic elements of our card, right? Correct dimensions, correct content. Now, that's the gist of how this works. So I do want to show you guys how to do this in Inkscape. And while we're doing that, let's experiment a little bit, because right now, I mean, first off, this is not a great card. It doesn't look that good. Hopefully you recognize that. But I mean, we just sort of did the basics of, all right, this is one side of a 3.5 by 2 inch standard business card. Keep in mind that even in a confined design situation, right, there's all kinds of ways to experiment, right? We just went for the default, right? Landscape orientation, one side. Why don't we explore a little bit? Let's flip over to Inkscape, and you can do this in either program. You can do this in any program. It's just, you know, I wanted to do the basics here, and then we can maybe explore a little. So this is Inkscape. It's just freshly opened here. I'm going to edit this document. So I could set, well, I'm in millimeters. I could set this to, you know, the same kind of thing, 3.5 by 2. And I could even set this like this, right? So that we're dealing with a portrait orientation. That's an interesting idea. And then I could, if I wanted to, even think about, why don't I design both sides, right? Why am I limited to just the front? You know, I'm really not. So let's actually make this a little bit larger. You know, it doesn't matter too much. Let's just go 10 by 10, and I'll just make separate rectangles. Okay, so there's my page. Let's make a couple of rectangles. Let's see, they've got a stroke. Okay, they've got a 1 pixel stroke. Let's go ahead and scale these. So 2.5 by 3, there we go. And let's copy and paste another. Right. And we can call these the front and the back. Oops. I'm just going to label those. Okay, so maybe I want to put my QR code, because if we look at it here, this is really sort of an awkward design element. It's square, which is tricky to integrate. You know, squares are often tricky to integrate, particularly when it's against a rectangular, well, a more obviously rectangular shape, right? So maybe I want this on the back. Let's try, let's see, we'll import. Slightly different terminology, file import. Let's do the QR code here. There she is. Just scale this. And curiously, you can see if we hold Shift, unlike on Illustrator, if we hold Shift here, it does this. It looks kind of goofy, right? What's going on there? Well, look at the bottom. When we click on it, see how, or mouse over it, it says scale selection with Control to scale uniformly. That's what we want. With Shift to scale around rotation center. That's not what we want. So let's hold down Control, and now it scales uniformly, right? So we can pop that right in there. And then maybe I could put, you know, whatever this is linking to. So, you know, let me just pop in, just in case the person doesn't have a QR code reader, and, you know, that there's a good chance of that. Yeah, we can change the font size, although since this is a vector, I can really just do that. It's basically the same thing. I think it sets it up here. Yeah. And let's pull in that logo, because I want to get that color scheme again. I think that's it. Sure, for now. Let's see. Oh, I think these are already separated. Oh yeah, they are. Oh, awesome. So let's actually scale this up. Control, If I were being really conscientious, I want to make sure that these were, if not identical, I want to start thinking about the actual vertical alignment, that there's consistency being built up. But, I'm building this as you're watching, so you give me a little slack, I guess. So I could do something like, take one of these colors. Let's just make a rectangle here. Let's kill the stroke if we can. And make the fill, let's bloop. So I was using the eyedropper tool over here to select that color is what I was doing. Okay, and then I could even, in fact, if I wanted to drop my text object down here and, oops, I want to bring it to the front because it's behind that other one. So let's say, is it raised to top? Yeah. What happened there is, every time you draw an object, there's essentially an invisible stack, right? So this one was behind this one, and I had to switch that order. I could even make this white now if I wanted. Right. And then over here, I can maybe add some text, like my contact info. I would probably select a different font, but rather than the generic sans serif. But I don't really want to spend a lot of time hunting and pecking right now. Oh yeah, this looks like your font. No, that's... Let's see. That's good. Change the font size. Oh, yeah, and I'd want this. Even though you know my feelings on centering, but this is an appropriate use of it, right? You don't center paragraph, anything you're going to read, extended reading, you don't center, but this you're not. This is a perfect use of centering. It's a long day. So let's see, I got my name, I got contact email. I've got my QR code on the back with an actual textual link to what it does, because not everyone has a QR code reader handy, so they could just always type it in here. So, we did a little experimenting here. Let's just back up. We decided to design both sides rather than just the front here. And look at, honestly, this is a much better card. And, I whipped it up in the same amount of time, but just think about how I'm actually working with the dimensions of the logo, managing this square, right, so that it kind of works out better. I'd want to tweak this. This isn't perfect, but, for 2 minutes or whatever it took me to do, it's workable. It's a draft. It's a working draft. So, think creatively about, how do I work with the elements I have to include? What are the possibilities of even this limited format, right? You've got two sides, you've got different orientations you can use, right? Consider one that's on a bias, right? What if you designed it at an actual angle, right? Think about the possibilities. You don't just have to do this and say, well, I got my 3 elements, that's it, right? It's not. So feel free to peruse the link here on our project page about unusual business card examples, right? Now, some of these are going to be different dimensions, right? Because we're not using 3.5, or excuse me, we are using 3.5 by 2. Some of these are not. Some of them are. I bet these are. They're just a different material. But like that Lego minifig, we're not doing that. Think about that for the future. For our project, we're keeping, sort of the standard dimensions so that we can, walk before we run. All right, that's the gist of it. This is a shorter tutorial, although it's still longer than I wanted it to be. But we're going to get some experience in class banging away at these as we have before in response to your feedback. After you watch this tutorial, we're going to just, bang away at this on Thursday. So if you have any questions, you can always email me or hang on to them until I see you again. Otherwise, thanks a lot. See you in class.